Welcome, everyone, to the ADA Honest Discussion Series, Real Organizations Finding Their Way. This session today is focused on websites and manual accessibility audits. My name is Lynn Wehrman. I'm the president, founder, and CEO of Digital Accessibility by WECO, digital accessibility company that puts the skills and talents of people with disabilities to work for your websites as subject matter experts and digital accessibility guides. I'm really excited about the panel that we have today. Website audits are a hot topic right now with the ADA web rule. They're usually the starting point for most organizations to discover, how inaccessible is this website? What do we need to do to make it accessible? And so we wanted to get together a group of people today that are right in the thick of it, working on digital accessibility for their government agencies. So I'm just going to introduce our panel, or allow them to introduce themselves a little bit here. Alex, why don't we start out with you?
Sure. My name is Alex Carlson. I'm the Public Affairs Manager for the Metropolitan Mosquito Control District based in St. Paul, but we serve the 7 counties throughout the Twin Cities. And we just had a manual accessibility audit done, just completed. So we're in the stages of kind of working on making the fixes so that we can be compliant.
Great. Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan Roupe. I'm the Digital Media and Marketing Specialist for the City of Eagan, Minnesota. We also just completed our first manual audit, or at least our first pass, and are in the stage of taking care of some of those corrections.
Okay, great. And Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian Lovely. I'm a senior accessibility specialist at WECO. Been working with WECO for a couple years now. I typically work with the more technical aspects of the auditing process, working directly with the auditors. And I'm WAS certified with the International Association of Accessibility Professionals.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Before I jump into the topic, I just want to remind everyone that WeCo webinars are always accessible. So we're in Zoom, and if you're familiar with Zoom, then you can disregard my instructions. But we do have in chat our moderator, Val Lockhart, who is there to assist should anyone need it. And then if you would like to access the captions, you click on the icon, which is on the far right of the 3 rows that says more ... and there is a show captions icon that you can select from a pop-out list. If you are having any issues accessing this webinar, you can certainly chat with Val. And if the chat isn't working for you, please speak up, because we want to make sure that you're accessing everything. This is being recorded, and it will be captioned and released within the next week, so you can share it with others. All right. So we're really excited to talk with you all about this. Website accessibility has been really, really kind of a push and pull, I think, between AI and dashboards and algorithms, and also accessibility overlays that companies put on websites to claim that it makes it accessible. But where the court system has been for many years, our company has worked with 3 different prominent law firms on helping their clients make their websites accessible. And the DOJ has really centered their efforts on that the only way that we can determine for legal purposes whether a website's accessible or not is through a manual audit. So our process was actually developed with a law firm back in 2016, 2017. So we've been doing audits for a long time. What I'd like to do is start out the panel today with Brian talking a little bit about how manual accessibility audits work. and why we use them, why they are a good starting point for organizations trying to comply with that ADA web rule. Ryan?
So a manual accessibility audit, um, essentially, it kind of depends on the auditor, what their preferred order of operations is. But it could they will essentially, well, let me back up just a second. So there's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is an internationally accepted standard for testing websites and other digital properties like PDFs. And it consists of roughly 80 some success criteria, some of which are, and they're split into A, double A, and triple A um, categories, I guess I could say. And the A category is like the absolutely essential, like you just should not sleep on these. The double A, if you can reach double A, then you're great. You're really right in the pocket. And the triple A ones are actually pretty difficult to achieve in some instances, and are not necessary, strictly necessary to the accessibility of your site. So that said, when an auditor audits your property, they're testing it against this standard. And so the the standards are all written to take into account the way that people who have some form of disability that affects their use of the internet um, will interact with your content and also perceive your content. So someone could have low vision, and therefore there are checks for color contrast to make sure that there's good contrast. And in addition, it's not just people who have a form of permanent disability. Every disability that affects your use of the internet has a permanent, a temporary, and a situational uh, version. So I won't, every time I mention a particular one, I'm not going to split it up into those three, but just for like, say, color contrast. So someone could have permanently poor vision. Someone could be temporarily have poor vision. They misplaced their glasses and they're using an old pair of glasses, or they went to the optometrist and they got drops in their eyes. Or someone could be in a um, uh, uh, situational situation where they need good contrast. For instance, they could be in a brightly lit area. So it doesn't necessarily, when we talk about disability, we aren't necessarily talking about permanent disability. But
So,
anyway, so low, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
Brian, if we could get into, so how does our team actually do a manual audit?
So some of it involves using the keyboard. So a person who uses the keyboard alone needs to be able to tab to elements and interact with elements. So the auditor will use the keyboard and make sure that everything that is interactable can be interacted with the keyboard, and every task that is on the site then can be completed with the keyboard.
Mhm.
They'll check those things like color contrast, and there are tools you can use to do that. You can put the hex colors for the text and the background color into a tool, and it will tell you um, what the ratio between the two colors is.
So it's
They
like a
will,
checklist the team is following
yeah, exactly.
and
And then they'll turn on a screen reader and basically go through the site just like anybody would who was using a screen reader, and they're listening to make sure that they can tell, because every element that's in a web page or in a document, that's not just a piece of text, and that includes a heading. So a heading is a piece of text, but there's a little more to it. It has some kind of metadata, you could say, with it because the fact that it is a heading, so it's actually denoting the beginning of a section or a change of slight change of topic or something like that. So the screen reader can announce the roles of any element that's not just plain text, and also some other attributes. So you might have a button that's like a toggle button that has two states, then it can communicate that state, whether it's pressed or not pressed. And so they'll go through the entire site, and as they go, they'll record any issues they find in a report, and then which ultimately gets delivered to the client.
So just to recap, so we're having native screen reader users and people that use specific devices that do parts of this audit. We're having accessibility and who also have accessibility credentials and their certification through IAP. Hey Josh, we'll get you introduced in a second here. And then what we're doing is condensing that into a written report for the client that looks like a spreadsheet that identifies the issues and it identifies the areas that we found the issues, and then it gives them suggested remedies. Correct?
Correct. And also indicates kind of how it would affect users. So just to use
Mhm.
my color contrast issue, it could say something like low vision users may have difficulty perceiving the text, because it has low color contrast.
Okay. So we've got real life clients that are taking this information and acting upon it. And just wanted to ask Josh if you could introduce yourself to the panel. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm Joshua Andreasen. I work for Washoe County in digital accessibility. Um, and I'm a business technologist. So we have several different tools. WeCo is a partner of ours, and they've helped provide us reports and manual testing on our website. And I'm the one who actually puts in action the remedies onto our
Oh,
site.
well, I think that's a good segue to this to the next question. And we've got purposely on this panel we put together Josh and Washoe County who have been actively working for some time. We've got Ryan who is City of Eagan who is kind of in the middle of the process, and Alex who's kind of at the start of the process. So we're going to start backwards with Joshua. First, could you share a little bit about your background in accessibility, your role? You said you work on the remedies. Could you just introduce yourself a little bit that way?
Sure. So, with Washoe County, I haven't traditionally been an accessibility expert. That is not my background. I mainly work on the website. I do a lot of front end development, and I work with our back end developers. And so my main task has been to manage all of our 150 content editors we have through the organization that put information on the website. And so a few years ago, about 3 years ago, we kind of saw the writing on the wall, like, hey, we need to start taking accessibility seriously. And it was right before the DOJ came down with the ruling. And so we actually started working on it. We came up with a plan of how we were going to evaluate our website and all of our digital communications and make sure we could start working towards being accessible. And so we put together a strategic plan and procedures on how we were going to do that.
Okay. And how has the web accessibility process worked for you? How have you been working to apply those results? Is there process? Did you change things in the organization?
Yes, so myself and my manager were kind of reassigned to lead accessibility for the county to basically figure out what do we need to do. So we identified some different vendors that could help us with that. WeCo was one of them. that could help us identify what needed to be fixed. Because, we were not, I was not an accessibility expert. I would do front end web design. I never paid attention to having to do alt text, or it just wasn't something that we required. So we actually took some webinars to get up to speed on what accessibility is and what it means. And we really dove into um, and then when the DOJ came out with the, WCAG 2.1 AA ruling, we really dug into those and said, okay, what does this actually mean? What is actually required of us? So we organized it. And then we evaluated. We have some site scanning tools too. We use Site Improve that helps us identify some things on our website. It doesn't identify everything, which is why we need manual review, but it did kind of help us identify the low-hanging fruit and everything that we really need to work on first. And so we just kind of got up to speed, and then we created training for our employees, because this is not something that's just, we have almost 4,000 employees. We have six something thousand pages on our website. I can't do everything. So we took training very seriously here. And so we created several training courses for our employees. And that is a part of now, if they're going to do any work on the website at all, or if they're going to be sending out, they have to go through an accessibility course that we created. They have to go through a um, other training for our website, just so everything's done properly, so we can stop accessibility issues before they're, because we're going to be chasing ourselves if we have an employees that are creating content that isn't accessible, then we have to keep going back and fixing it. So we really took it as a culture shift. Like, we're trying to change the culture in our organization to take accessibility um, seriously at every level of staff, not just people who work on the website.
Mhm. And I think that's a really important point, Joshua, that a lot of organizations don't get that governance piece. And I think that's at the heart of what a successful accessibility program is that you have to have knowledge to be able to touch the website or to touch documents. A lot of our clients think that I'm radical when I say don't give people access to PDF software until they have had training on how to create native accessible documents. But yeah, well, Ryan, let's go to you. I'd like to hear more about, what your background is, how you got into this.
Yeah, absolutely. I originally come from the private sector. I worked for a large insurance company and was handling internal communications. So not a lot of attention was really paid to accessibility. And then I came here about 4 years ago to the city. And beyond just the accessibility standpoint, we just had a lot of content editors and subject matter experts that had their hands in the website, because our communication team isn't particularly large. But by virtue of that, we had a lot of different people doing things a lot of different ways, using headlines for styling purposes instead of actual like logical flow throughout a web document.
Okay.
So we started there, started putting together some trainings to make sure people had a better understanding, level set and make sure that we're using things in the right way. And then I actually saw Lynn last summer at a conference out in Las Vegas, and the idea of having folks that actually are living with disabilities looking through a website, auditing that website through their eyes, through their senses, and I just thought that was the best approach I had heard of thus far in approaching, this thing we all have to deal with.
Alex, please tell us more about you and how things are been working in your agency.
Yeah, so I've been with Mosquito Control for 7 years now, and before that, I actually worked for a nonprofit that did programming for people with disabilities. So I kind of got to see firsthand people using, assistive devices and screen readers and things like that. So I do our website. I'm a team of one essentially. So I run our website. I created it. I manage all the pages and stuff like that. And I thought I had accessibility front of mind because of my past experience, but I realized there's a lot that was falling through the cracks. And so that's why we sought out and realized that the need for an accessibility audit was important because for one, it was hard to keep up with everything and do it all by myself. But then also just with all the legislative changes and stuff, we wanted to make sure that we were covered for potential issues that we might be facing.
So, Alex, I'm going to start again with you and just ask the question because you're in the starting point of this manual audit process. So, what is the approach your agency is taking towards this manual accessibility audit that you've received in this information?
Yeah, so what I found was really helpful was we were given different priority levels of all the issues that need to be fixed. And so we're basically, and I say we, but it's really me, going through each of the items based on priority. So obviously there were a couple of like critical issues that needed to be addressed right away. So those are kind of like, I just kind of redid the spreadsheet so that those are at the top so I can make sure that I'm hitting those first. And then kind of working through page by page after that to make sure that everything else that needs to get addressed gets addressed. But what I found was really helpful was not just the the spreadsheet with the list of all the errors because some of those things I kind of knew were coming. Some of those things were new to me or things that I hadn't been thinking of. But there was a lot of stuff that even though it was well written out and a good explanation of what the issue was, I still don't really understand it. And so meeting with Brian and having him kind of walk through some of these issues with me in a face-to-face phone call or Zoom call, that was really helpful because there were some issues that were marked as critical issues. And even reading, I was like, I have never heard of this before. I've never heard of, this is something that websites need to have. And a lot of those things are hidden. And all of a sudden I start going to all these websites and trying them. I'm like, oh my gosh, these are just kind of hidden features on all these websites that I never knew were there because I'm not using those assistive devices. So being able to just talk through some of those issues, and a lot of them were very quick, easy fixes, things that, just a couple, quick additions in the back end that was able to make us come to compliance. But I would have never known about those had I not sat down with a phone call after the accessibility audit and really kind of walked through the process.
So I'll put you on the spot here. Can you give an example or two of kind of those aha moments? Because we want to help organizations understand that, yes, you can do this too.
Yeah, well, like just the first example that I think of is the skip to content button, which is when you hit tab you open a website, you hit tab, and a lot of websites it shows up skip to content, and then it skips through the menu so you can get to the actual content of the page. I didn't know that those existed. I've never. They don't show up if you're just using a regular browser or a phone or something like that to look at a website. It's only if you're like actually tabbing around a website that shows up. But I found out with our, with our design software that we use, it was very easy to turn that feature on. But it just, hadn't even noticed as something that I needed before. So that's just one example that, came to mind first and foremost.
That's great. Well, Ryan, I want to skip to you next and just talk about how your agency, you're kind of at that midpoint, put that manual audit to work for you. And what was that reality like? Were there stumbling blocks? How did you deal with them?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Alex was saying, the spreadsheet that's provided is super accessible in both terms of information and obviously readability and whatnot. But it was easily digestible, and the conversation with Brian really helped kind of, shave off any sharp corners, so to speak, with if there's any knowledge gaps and whatnot. One of the biggest things we've done is to try to get more governance in place around the website and make sure the folks that don't have the training that's necessary, not necessarily making those updates right away. We have kind of a pipeline that we've set up, a triage to where we have a small group of people that do have the training necessary to get the updates done in the correct manner, make sure that those are there as well. But it's really surprising, having been in it as long as I have in web development design. You think you have a good grasp on things, but when you actually are working with somebody that is working through a disability, it blows my mind how much was not on my radar at all. It was very eye-opening.
Did you have an example of something you learned in the process?
Just Friday. So I've been struggling. We created a new landing page for our Parks and Recreation registration site, and it's like the difference between, pseudo classes with, focus versus focus visible, and making sure that when you're tabbing through, that you're actually targeting the appropriate tag instead of, if you have an anchor tag, a link that's buried within another, div or another parent container, making sure that your CSS, your classes are actually hitting the right thing that you're supposed to be hitting, or that the user is hitting when they're tabbing through the site.
Yeah, and I think it's just important to understand that while everybody on this webinar has worked with us, what we do is not unusual, except for the fact that we insist on staffing our team with certified professionals who live with disabilities. So if you're watching this, there are lots of organizations that do manual audits and provide guidance. So we're, really speaking to that wider industry too. Okay, Josh, how did you put that manual audit to work for you with your team? Larger organization, maybe a little bit more ramp up to the manual audit.
Yeah, we found there were a lot of different issues that just we were not prepared. So some of them were like the skip to content. We didn't have that. We had to add that. We had issues with our mega menus, and we have multiple menus. So we have a top nav in our site, but then when you go to departments, they have a department navigation, and then there's even a side navigation. So because it's a large website with a lot of different, we have 24 departments, and we have a myriad of different divisions. And so there were things like that we really didn't understand and didn't even come up on scanners or anything like focus. So when someone would get and this could only be found through a manual audit, like when someone would come on a mega menu and select it, we had some menus that they weren't really able to actually go through the items. It would only go through the main categories, not the sub items. And then we had other things like focus issue where they were trapped. Like once they went into the menu, there was no way to close the menu for a non-visual user. They kind of got trapped in that menu, and so we had quite a few areas where only a manual audit would have identified those things, and that's through a actual um, person with a disability using their software that they say, hey, I'm having issues navigating your website because when I go into this menu or something, I'm like trapped now. I don't know where I am. I don't know what I'm doing. And so that really, really helped us identify real world, like, okay, so we need to make some adjustments here.
And I think what you've identified as a keyboard trap for people who are keyboard dependent who don't use mouses. Yeah, is that correct, Brian? I'm not sure if you were.
Correct.
Yeah. Brian, can you explain what what was happening with Joshua's website in or I don't know if you worked on that particular one, but or in general.
So main navigation menus, there are some, I hesitate to say pitfalls, because all these things can be fixed, but there are some things you have to keep an eye on, and that is that essentially that you can indeed use them with the keyboard. So you have to be able to go through the top level. You typically, if you think of your typical navigation in a website, you'll have about us and FAQ in your various sections, and then some of them may take you directly to a single page. Others may open a menu with a selection of pages under that category. And so you have to make sure that not only can you go through that menu and open those direct to single page uh, links, but also that you can open those menus and go through those menus. And what can happen sometimes when a menu opens is focus can get either trapped in there, so you can't get out and go on to the rest of the menu, or the menu can not close when you move away from it. So if you're a sighted keyboard only user and you open this big menu that's hanging down in front of page content and you move on and it's still hanging out, then you've got this big blind spot stuff you can't see. And
Well,
also, I swear I'll finish this.
no, it's good.
If you, what's great for keyboard only users is if they have the ability to choose to open that menu. So you don't want to have that menu open just automatically when you land on that top level, because then somebody has to go through all those to get to a later part of the menu.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I think that get controls is a huge part. Having control, no matter how you're using that website, is a really important part of accessibility that isn't something that you think about if you don't use assistive technology. So, was there, I think I'm going to jump back to Ryan and just say, was there a huge stumbling block, a huge issue that's come up yet in your manual audit that you felt, was really a learning breakthrough that changed how you did things?
Um, I mean, we haven't run into anything particularly troublesome. I touched on the pseudo class that we were running into with the focus visible
Yeah.
not targeting the right one, but I think a lot of like tab index is an attribute that kind of
Mhm.
helps kind of solve some problems when you're talking about navigation in general that we've run into. Um, Fortunately, we were in a good space to start with. There's always issues that we had to work with, but I can't really speak to anything other than the example I already gave that was a real breakthrough.
Okay. I'm going to hop back to you, Joshua, and ask, did the training make a difference? Once you got your manual audit results, do you think it made a difference?
Absolutely. Because we didn't understand you can be given like technical, even given an audit and say, hey, here's what's going on or here's what's wrong, but understanding how it actually affects the user and why, like what's the real world impact, really helps, like with training and understanding of what we're trying to do here and how this affects people. So
How are you leveraging that manual audit and the remediation time as training? Is the remediation serving at all as kind of like a live on the job training for people? Are you documenting processes out of that?
yeah, we've created SOPs for the future on how we are to create page templates, because we actually have a large department of, in technology services. They might set up new sites, or we have vendor sites. And so we've documented um, all of these key points that says, hey, you need to make sure that if it's a vendor site, if it's a site that we're building, in-house, that we're conforming to these standards. And so that's kind of how we put it to work. And then we do training. We train with all of our developers to make sure that they understand accessibility, they understand the requirements. Um, and then obviously content editors, they have like a lower degree of training because they're really just, they don't need to know the development side as much as just when you're creating content, you need to make sure your contrast is good. You need to make sure you're using, logical reading order. You need to make sure that your alt text on tags and stuff. And we've even begun to implement. I just recently did a presentation for all of our content editors and developers on ARIA labels. And even though ARIA labels are not required, we are beginning to start making those a standard procedure to use them when HTML kind of falls short or and so learning how to use ARIA because we kind of see the writing on the wall that in the future that's going to be probably something that's going to be mandatory, I feel. So
Well, and you make a good point that a few people realize that about 75% of the web content accessibility guidelines are based in content and not code, and that it's really, really crucial that people who write for the web be included and understand things like how to create plain text. I mean, I was with a government agency for 6 years. I was in charge of the website for was Minnesota Department of Transportation Office of Transit, and I was in a continued battle with my superiors about the purpose of the website. It was full of a lot of jargon, and it was full of information for grant recipients who we dealt with mainly, who ran small transit properties, but there was no information on how to catch a bus anywhere in the state of Minnesota. And, and even though it said that's what it meant, what it was there for. So it's something that I think is really, really important, and we'll try to swing back and talk about. But I really wanted to ask Alex, being brand new, what's this manual audit being bringing up for your organization? Is it getting you guys moving forward on any training? And I know that you're a small shop, you're a special government. That's part of why we wanted to feature you today. But really interested in how what this is stirring up for you now.
Yeah, well, it's really just changed my approach to kind of all of our communications, not just our website, but anything that we're doing that's out there that's, public facing communications. Just, I kind of, I kind of have like the, design background and some website background and stuff like that. So my thought is always like, what's aesthetically the best looking or the coolest looking? And I realized a lot of times the most visually appealing is the opposite of accessible. With like I'm a big I do a lot of video and stuff like that, so a lot of times videos kind of playing in multiple areas and stuff like that, scrolling through a website, that can really mess up if you're using a screen reader or if you're using something like that. So maybe changing my approach and thinking how can I still be creative and visually appealing and accessible, and make sure that it's checking all of those boxes, and not just focusing on kind of the visual side of things. So, and in terms of training that we're doing, we are looking at hosting some sort of kind of lunch and learns just to talk about accessibility for within our staff. Not a lot of our staff do contribute to the communication side of things, but just it's something that everybody should be aware of.
Okay. I'll give you a little bit of pushback on the visual accessibility, that it's the better looking it is, the less accessible it is. So I was born with two cognitive disabilities, and I'm somebody that really benefits from things that look good digitally. But just want to caution you a little bit that it has to look good. The layout has to be pleasing. There has to be good white space
Yeah.
for usability, because those of us who can see it, and many of us are visual learners, even if we do not have a disability, but that's losing the beauty of that, the beauty and design really doesn't make something more accessible. I can understand, having been in that position when I started to learn about digital accessibility, really kind of getting caught up in worrying about people who had non-visual access. But just a word of encouragement that hopefully it's not defeating to hear that, but that that beauty of design is really, really important.
Well, I think maybe I mean more like kind of rethinking what the design should be than versus, I'm not saying I'm trying to make things not
Yeah.
look visually appealing, but I just like for example, if I have like an image and the only way to see the text is to mouse over the image and then it kind of fades in and has like a
Right.
cool effect, that effect looks cool, but there's no way that somebody with a key read or the keyboard reader ever gets to see it just because of the way that I've programmed the effect to show up. So I've found a different way to present that information in a visually appealing way, that's not animations and stuff like that in the way that counteracts with somebody who's using assistive devices.
And thanks for that distinction. That's a really good description of finding that balance. Because that's what I think people struggle with is that, finding that edge of, yeah, it looks really, really cool. But I know Brian talks a lot about people with vestibular disabilities and moving images can sometimes make them ill. So that stuff's important. So thank you for that. Um, Ryan, I'm just wondering if you might be able to share with us what you would have done differently, starting an accessibility effort now, knowing what you now know. Um, if you could do it over again, what would you have done differently?
I mean, it would have started a lot earlier, but
Amen.
I think having the grasp over the website's one thing, but the content that's also included on the website, PDFs in particular, are one of the biggest struggles we're running into is knowing how to get a accessible PDF put together from the baseline instead of, converting, instead of trying to go back and remediate everything, and also trying to change the thinking about why does this need to be a PDF? Why can't this just be a web page that somebody can just go on and browse with myriad devices instead of having to go in and, obviously most browsers are able to take a PDF and do it, but making it readable, making it make sense, making it logical for assistive technology. I wish we could go back 10 years and change all that.
So, do you think that having that manual accessibility audit gave you more confidence to turn more of this content into HTML rather than keeping it in a PDF?
Absolutely. And that's kind of what we're trying to do right now is, we're auditing our website for all the PDFs that are on that and trying to make a plan. Like, does this need to be a PDF? Can we just convert this into a web page? Is this just web content? And that's kind of what we're working through right now is making that logic flow for ourselves. Like when is a PDF necessary? When is it not necessary? And that's kind of where we're at.
How's that being received in your agency?
A lot of pushback. I can't lie with that. People, number one, get into not I don't want to say a rut, but get into a flow. People don't like
Mhm.
change, and people get used to delivering content in one way. And when you push back on that and say, "Hey, maybe there's a different way that we can do this," um, people bristle. And I think a lot of the work that we're doing right now is to kind of handle personalities, handle, how people do their jobs. And that's a very personal thing for people. We're fortunate that we have a lot of really good people that take a lot of pride in the work that they do, that feel they have a mission to do for the city. So we want to make sure that they can still accomplish their mission, but make it a little bit more, well, not make it a little bit more, make it accessible for as many people as possible.
I know when I worked for the state, there was kind of this push and pull over, people felt like they had control of the PDF because they could create it on their own.
Yeah.
Whereas if it had to go on the website, they had to ask a developer, and they didn't like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of apprehension when it comes to writing for the web.
Mhm.
We're fortunate that we have a CMS, a content management system that, WYSIWYG editors, as far as just content editing
Mhm.
goes, gets the job done. And if you have a good CMS, you can build those guardrails in to where, you can't necessarily use colors that you shouldn't be using. You can build in a palette, you can build in styles where people
Sure.
can't get too far away. But still, people there's apprehension with technology that people aren't used to, and part of what we're trying to do is, kind of ease that apprehension.
So Alex, I know you're newer into this process than the other panelists, but even in the short period of time that you've been engaged in your manual audit, is there something that you would have done differently if you had had that knowledge?
No, I agree with Ryan. I would have done this earlier, just because we only had a certain number of pages reviewed, and there's like a lot of pages that we've been working on over time. And just now that I kind of know everything, as I'm creating content moving forward, I'll make sure it's all accessible. But I wish I would have started that from the beginning. And you know, so I'm looking kind of trying to simplify things, and a lot of those fixes were very easy, but some of them are going to take a little bit more time. So just wish I would have gotten going earlier, but now do with what we can.
So Ryan and Alex are the poster children for not delaying your ADA effort because the deadline got pushed out, right?
Very
Yes.
lucky.
It's a gift, not a delay. That's what I keep telling people. Make the most of it. So Joshua, we'd really like to hear from you on what you would do different with all the knowledge that you've gathered in this process.
Well, if we a reliance on PDFs is one big thing. We have a massive amount of we have 700,000 pages of PDFs on our
Oh my
website, and we're
goodness.
we're
Yeah, we
trying
had
to
a lot.
remediate. Yeah, and so we got some other technologies helping, but actually fixing the PDFs and going through. So that would, if I could go back, because that's our biggest pain point still, making sure that information, like, does this have to be a PDF? Like, can this just be a HTML page? Should it be?
Mhm.
And so now that's kind of our rule. That's what we're doing moving forward. But I wish we had maybe done that earlier. Um, and I'm trying to think if I go back, maybe more, I guess we've done messaging, but I guess we could have do more messaging and more to our employees. Because it's not just our website. We use like MailChimp, and we have to make sure our emails are accessible. We do things like so we actually developed a signature generator for all employees. So they just put in their department, they put in their info, and it generates a accessible signature line. So it has all the elements it needs for their emails and
Mhm.
um, a lot of different areas. So I guess just probably the PDF is the biggest thing. And if I went back, if we could just have a lot more of those taken away and generate an HTML, that would have been better.
How did the manual accessibility audit process wake you up to those realities? Did that play a part?
Oh yeah, so part of one of our audits is we actually looked at one of our reports that the health district puts out. And it's this huge, like 245-page report,
Oh.
and completely not accessible, of course, because it's a PDF and it's was
Mhm.
generated. I don't know what software they use, but and we actually went through a very lengthy session of what we would have to do to remediate this and fix this PDF. And it was like, oh my goodness, we need to get this under control immediately and start
Mhm.
making PDFs, just like Ryan said, they need to be compliant at the front end. Like we need to stop immediately stop the presses and say, hey, anything that we're putting forward, because there's no way we could go back and remediate all these. Like we can't continue to keep making um, issues for us to have to remediate. And so we gotta learn how to develop software that generates PDFs that are so the audit really helped open our eyes kind of to why it's so important to make sure that from the get-go we're thinking about how are we generating documents and what documents need to go, because that was an eye opener for us on the amount of effort it takes to remediate this.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to put a question out there for everybody because I'm hearing it and interesting, wasn't anticipating hearing the PDF question tie in so much, but it's a huge, huge issue. But I'm wondering how the manual audit experience was a teacher to your organizations about the real needs of people with disabilities. And I think you've touched on it in different ways. But how did that manual audit bring that human element home for each of you? And I apologize because that wasn't on the list of questions I gave you. So I'll just let you, if you go ahead and speak up if you've got a story or anything to share there.
Well, I think when you break it down and, when you hear the term assistive technology, you think of a screen reader or something like that. But when you really simplify it, a pair of glasses is assistive technology and able to kind of help people understand, put themselves in somebody else's shoes and say, like, we there's a level of empathy to it where you just have to understand that not every person perceives the world in the same way. And everybody knows somebody that's living with a disability. And I think when ask folks to, stop and think about that person in their life, that really helps drive the point home. So.
Okay. Anyone else want to share?
Yeah, just to piggyback off what Ryan said, one of the things I found when we got in, we started actually looking at what a user experience is. We came up with scenarios I wouldn't have even ever thought about. Maybe a family doesn't have money for a computer, and maybe they're accessing the website through a PlayStation or some kind of other device that does require keyboard access because they can only tab through. They don't have a traditional mouse, or they're not. And making sure that the information on there is easy to read, easy to digest and navigate. And so when you actually do like a manual audit, you're getting that user experience. Like, what is a user experiencing? Not just, okay, these are requirements, because you can put a list of requirements down on paper, but that doesn't compute to real world, like, how is this affecting people? And that was like the empathy, like Ryan said, like understanding, wow, my mother is aging. And so when my mother comes on the website and she doesn't understand technology as well, is she going to get confused? Not that she's blind or anything, just is the website easy to navigate? Is she able to understand the placement of things? Is it in a logical order? Is it easy to read? Like, and so that really manual audits really helped us
Well,
in those
even
areas.
something is using simple language instead of jargon and whatnot, like that. There's disabilities that aren't perceivable, and making that information on your website digestible to as many people as possible, I think, meets the user where they're at.
Mhm.
Alex, did you have anything you wanted to chime in on?
No, I just think that the conversation after the accessibility audit just shines such a more bright lights on the actual issues and being able to kind of talk through them, which you wouldn't get without with a manual accessibility audit. If it was just like something scraping your website, it can find errors, but it doesn't really explain what the issue is or why or anything like that. And I feel like that's what you get with the manual accessibility audit. You don't just get the what, but you get the why and the how, so that you really know how to fix it then, and why it's a concern that you needs to be addressed in the first place.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I think this is a good stopping point, and just to check. You all had such great insights, but let's check in to see if we have any questions from the audience.
We do have one in the chat, Lynn. The question is, what if an organization or a team doesn't have the expertise to do a manual audit and also does not have the funds or budget to hire an expert? can they still audit their sites and apps, or how can they start on their own? And then they go on to say, our staff are asking how do they know when they've completed an audit? Do they simply test for every WCAG criterion? Or do they need to be certified for their own audit to be valid or legit? Do we need an expert vendor to confirm?
Well, from a legal standpoint, it never hurts to have an expert, but we work with a lot of organizations that come to us that have limited funds. Brian, I'm wondering if you could give some insight on how somebody might conduct without the expertise you have, might be able to go through and do a manual audit on their own.
But one simple thing you can do is just start pressing the tab key. You should be able to see what item currently has focus, and you should be able to interact with that item the same way that you would with the mouse. So you should be able to activate links, open navigation menus, and things like that. Another thing you can do is just drag your browser so that it's really narrow. This is assuming that your website is displayed on both the desktop and the phone, as opposed to having like a separate web app. And that will see if the browser content is able to what we call reflow, which is a typical example of reflow is in the full width. You might have 3 columns, and then on a small screen like a phone, those columns would drop one below the other so that it's a single long column. Things like that can go a long way towards ensuring the accessibility of your site, and also don't necessarily require a lot of special equipment to test.
And I think I'd add to that that if you focus more on the function of the site, using the WCAG as guidance, certainly, but and less on hitting all of the criterion, but more is it, does the tab order work on this page or in this form? I mean, don't you think, Brian? I think sometimes when people don't know a lot about WCAG, it gets overwhelming. But if you think of it more from the user perspective, and that I need this to work for a human.
And you can bring that list of criterion down to size a little bit by remembering that you don't necessarily have to worry about AAA. That takes, I don't know, maybe 20 or so off. Also, what kind of content is on the page? So the lower numbered success criteria relate mostly to audio and video content. Not all, but most of them relate to, and if there's no audio or video content on a page, then you don't have to worry about checking those either.
Okay. All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience. It's really important, and part of WECO's mission is to get people together so they can